Good evening, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of the Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times, and it looks like I do not actually even have my microphone in right now, so you guys are hearing me off of my super cruddy laptop mic. Let me go ahead and fix that problem for you. I apologize. Seems like there's all but that's of course perfectly fine, you guys. I guess used to that by now, right? Anyways, thank you guys very much for being here. I want to remind you guys that you are watching this exclusively on the TheCynicogue News, where of course we like to remind you to think like a Neanderthal and embrace those titles that your opponents like to give you, because of course if you're not going to, who else will? Obviously, as is usual, we don't really have a ton of announcements on this particular channel. But I do want to remind you guys to please like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you're new here and have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. We try to make sure that is Monday, Tuesday, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. My apologies. 3 times a week to give you guys my take on some of the news that I find interesting. Hopefully you guys find it interesting too, and we'll hit that subscription as a result. And if you think it's important information, please consider getting it out to your friends and family. Obviously, send it through text message, send it through email, send it through all the different places that you send it. But more importantly, get it to those different social media websites that you frequent, because what good is a message without an audience to hear it? And we want, of course, this to go out. And while you are there getting this out to the different social media platforms which you frequent, I would like to ask that you please get on some of the alternative social media platforms, things such as Parler, Gab, and Minds. If you're a big fan of the Twitterverse, those are basically Twitter clones. Gab being my personal favorite. Also, we have things like Telegram and MeWe if you are a big Facebook fan. MeWe being my favorite out of those. And then Rumble or BitChute if you're big onto YouTube. Odyssey as well. Rumble being my favorite of those. And I have a particular recommendation for Rumble if you like this show, because I do believe that the days of conservative content on YouTube are numbered. So if you're a fan of the show, please remember to follow the backup channel on Rumble. We don't go live there, but we do post videos after the fact there. And if you guys are interested, I certainly would recommend giving a little bit of a subscription there or a follow on any of these other different alternative websites, and actually, helping us take back free speech on the internet. So, with that, let's go ahead and jump into the conversation for today. Our pre-article conversation, whatever, I gotta find a better name for that because that doesn't really sound good for branding. But the portion of this where we just have a brief talk about a sort of random thing is upon us. And at this particular point, the thing that I would like to talk about is how do I word this correctly? Hang on just 1 second. I actually have to fix something with my internet here. My apologies. Sorry about that. Anyways, so what I want to talk about here today, before we get into the articles, is the ideas of political optimism, and why I think it's not wise for us to partake in political optimism, even when it appears that we are winning. Now, I want everybody to understand me here. I am not saying that we should just be super depressed and cynical and we're never going to win and the country is going to die and there's no point in doing anything and all that other kind of stuff. That's not what I'm trying to say. However, I think there's a tendency amongst conservatives to kind of take these really little wins and then start to look like, the world's changing and we're starting to, take back our government and our country is going to be better and all this other kind of stuff. And it's just kind of a big facade, right? And in light of some recent victories in the courts, I just kind of want to stress that we need to be a little bit more, how do I put this? There needs to be more evidence put forward before we are convinced, hey, we're actually on the right track, right? we can't take a small victory or even a couple small victories or even a couple big victories in a row and immediately think to ourselves, hey, everything is going very well, very good, right? You guys kind of saw me say this when we were talking about the different court cases in, as far as the Ahmaud Arbery case and the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the other gentleman who his name is fleeting me, but who was actually let off. I think it was Devin Walker. Was actually let off for a murder charge he did not commit, right? He did not commit the murder that he was charged with, is what I mean. And, there was 3 very awesome victories in a row. And I was saying, obviously we should celebrate these. We should take them in stride. We should make sure that we're building on them. But also, let's not deceive ourselves into thinking that now all of a sudden everything's peaches and rainbows and we've just gotten out of, the worst of the worst. I just don't think that that's a wise thing to do. And really, I just think that that's, more than being cynical, it's being quite realistic, to abuse a cliche, right? We live in a society that is more and more progressive, that is more and more globalist, that is more and more direct democracy and not constitutional Republican as we used to be, right? It's more interested in things like the modern consensus over instituted liberties, for example, and all these other kinds of points that we obviously have changing. If that's the direction that the society is going in, I don't see why, just because we have a small win here and a small win there, we think all of a sudden that's going to be enough to change it into going our direction. If you're like me, a traditionalist, a deeply fundamentalist religious person, a paleocon, a nationalist, somebody who considers capitalism to be a good word, you're not winning just because the court did some cool stuff in abortion recently. That's not cynical to say, it's just being honest. And with that, let's go ahead and jump right into some of the articles we have today. I do want to say Cryptomaria and the trusty ape friend Kevin is here. Thank you both for being here. I certainly appreciate you guys. Please remember to like and share if you do like the content. And yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So our first conversation for today is actually the headliner. I wanted to make sure to get to this as soon as possible. And that is the Louisiana governor, John Bel Edwards, has recently forged the signature of the Louisiana Attorney General in a intervention in a criminal case, namely the case of one Pastor Tony Spell. I obviously do not believe that Pastor Tony Spell is a criminal, but what we mean by criminal case is to say that he's being charged in a criminal case, right? In being charged as a criminal, in other words, being charged with violating the law. Well, excuse me, wow. The governor recently intervened with a 72-page lawsuit of his own against Pastor Spell. And he actually appears to have forged the signature of the Louisiana Attorney General on this little lawsuit here to give the impression that the Louisiana Attorney General was actually on his side against Pastor Spell, which is not the case. It doesn't appear that a lot of big news organizations are talking about this. Pastor Spell himself has been talking about this, and a couple others around have been talking about this. We're going to be looking at Central City News, which is a local newspaper in the Louisiana area. But John Bel Edwards pulling a real Huey Long here. And for those of you who are students of American history, you will know Huey Long is very often said to be the kingfish in the in politics back in the 1930s for Louisiana. He was very close to what you would consider to be a state dictator. A lot of people did like Huey Long, to be fair, but he definitely had a bully mentality about him and certainly abused his powers. John Bel Edwards is getting real close to that same dictatorial nonsense. But nonetheless, I want to go ahead and jump right into the article here today so that you guys don't have to take my word for it. Of course, we've been keeping up with the Pastor Spell case for some time. to be honest with you, I probably do more talking about the Pastor Spell case than any other podcaster on online or on radio. But, you know, somebody's got to talk about it, right? So definitely not too worried about that. At any rate, this is the article here today, and it is from Central City News. It looks like it's not up, sorry. From Central City News. Governor Edwards falsely used Attorney General's name to try to intervene in criminal case against pastor. Let me go ahead and zoom this in for you. Governor Edwards falsely used Attorney General's name to try and intervene in criminal case against pastor. Now, for those who don't know, for those who may be tuning into this for the first time and haven't been catching up with Watchdogs recently and everything like that, or maybe this is just your first time even seeing one, what Pastor Tony Spell is accused of is violating the governor's COVID-19 mandates, right? So Governor John Bel Edwards, like many of the other governors across the country, had very strict lockdowns, saying that, you know, you had to have social distancing and you couldn't have more than a gathering of 10 people. And everybody had to wear masks and all this other kind of stuff, right? And Pastor Tony Spell basically said, look, we're just not going to do that. We're going to continue having our church services. We're not going to social distance in our church services. We're not going to force people to wear masks. We're not going to tell them that we have more than 10 people here, so you can't be in. We're just going to have church services because we believe we have a mandate from God to do that. And you're not going to stop us, basically, right? And so that is what he's being charged with. And of course, if that were a crime, he would absolutely be guilty of that. The thing is, it's absolutely not a crime, and Governor John Bel Edwards had no right to suspend the First Amendment rights to religious practice or First Amendment rights to assembly, and particularly in the state of Louisiana, by the way, because Louisiana actually has a clause in its own state constitution which says quite plainly that the governor, in a case of an emergency order, may not suspend the liberties as enshrined either in the Louisiana State Constitution or the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, which, of course, is only that first 10. But nonetheless, that is the Louisiana state law that's on the books. In other words, you can suspend certain liberties in the state of Louisiana because of a state of emergency, but they cannot be any of those liberties which are enshrined in the Bill of Rights, nor any of those liberties which are enshrined in the Louisiana State Constitution. So John Bel Edwards is just simply wrong here when he says that he had the right and authority to, without legal precedent and without any law backing him up, without any legislation backing him up, unilaterally decide we're going to shut down churches and we're going to say that they, have to meet all these certain requirements if they actually want to be open once we finally do let them open. He did not have a right to do that, and Pastor Tony Spell had every right to tell him to kick rocks. And indeed, if you want to talk biblically, he did also have a mandate to keep his services going. Now, in many other areas of the country, such as Pastor Tim Remington in Coeur d'Alene, such as Pastor John MacArthur in Los Angeles, by the grace of God, and I absolutely am thankful for this, things ended up slowing down as far as the state, what would you say, just putting these guys under their thumb, I guess, right? Started to kind of be hampered back a little bit. In the case of Pastor Spell, though, it only seems to be escalating more and more. And a big part of the reason for that is because the Louisiana state government is particularly corrupt, and Governor Edwards is particularly corrupt, as we're going to see in this video. But that just gives you guys a little brief idea as to what exactly is going on here in the first place, right? And, what we're talking about here in this case. So this is by Woody Jenkins from Central City News. So not CNN, but CCN. At any rate, in what have to be two of the most extraordinary filings in the history of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Governor John Bel Edwards tried to intervene in a criminal case pending before the court, an unprecedented move, and Attorney General Jeff Landry filed a motion to throw out the governor's intervention because he says the governor falsely filed the document in the name of the Attorney General. Yes, he falsely filed this document in the name of another government official, which is forgery and perjury, by the way. Forgery, of course, because you're just forging the signature of somebody who is not you. But perjury, because this is in a case, a criminal case, in the courts. And therefore, that's something that you're presenting under oath. That would be considered perjury, right? But anyways, continuing. The AG also said the governor has no authority to intervene in a criminal case on his own, which, of course, is 100% true. It all began Tuesday, January 18th, when Governor Edwards filed a 76, I actually said 72 earlier, so my apologies, filed a 76-page document with the Supreme Court, Louisiana Supreme Court, claiming to have the right to intervene in the criminal case charging Reverend Tony Spell of Central with the crime of holding church contrary to Edwards' orders back in March 2020, which is literally the crime. He held it. They don't say church, they say public gatherings, but that is actually the crime. He is being charged with 6 separate counts of holding public gatherings against the health mandates of the governor, right? Each one with a maximum sentence of 6 months in prison and $500 fine. So in total, he could serve a total of 3 years if he were to be held, if he were to have the book thrown at him, I guess. Sorry, my brain's still a little foggy from being sick. He would be potentially serving 3 years in prison and paying a $3,000 fine. That's the maximum sentence that he could possibly get if he were to lose here, right? On top of the fact that this would just be horrible for religious liberty in the state of Louisiana. But at any rate, the document purported to be from the Attorney General. Excuse me. Edwards wrote the law, which supposedly made it a crime for Pastor Spell to hold church. Actually, he issued an emergency order, which the governor says trumps the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The Attorney General says the governor has no power to make laws, and his orders cannot supersede the Constitution, which is, of course, true. You are the executive. That means you execute or carry out the law. It is the legislature that passes the law, right? They're the ones who come up with the laws. The executive does nothing but enforce the laws. It's like basic civics. But at any rate, Edwards' attempted intervention filed with the Supreme Court Tuesday would allow the governor to assist in prosecuting the pastor. Reverend Spell's attorney, Jeff Wittenbrink, said Edwards is trying to serve simultaneously in all 3 branches of government. As governor, he is the head of the executive branch. As a lawmaker, he is the part of the legislative branch. As a prosecutor, he is part of the judicial branch. Wittenbrink said that is called one-man rule and doesn't fly in American-style government. On Wednesday, January the 19th, Attorney General Jeff Landry filed a motion to strike or alternatively let me reread that because that was absolutely atrocious. On Wednesday, January 19th, Attorney General Jeff Landry filed a motion to strike or alternatively opposition to motion to intervene filed by Governor John Bel Edwards, end quote. The Attorney General's motion is extraordinary in its frankness. Quote, may it please the court, the Attorney General moves to strike the motion to intervene filed by Governor John Bel Edwards through Special Assistant Attorney General filed on January 18th, 2022, or in the alternative, opposes the motion to intervene filed by the governor for the reasons set forth below. So he's about to say, look, don't think that this should actually be happening. I think you need to do away with it. And I'm about to tell you why I think you need to do away with it. So let's go ahead and see why he says that. The motion to intervene, submitted in part by the attorneys with the law firm of Schur, Garner, Cahill, Richter, Klein, and Hilbert, LLC, and by Jack M. Weiss, attorney at law, was filed by those counsels purportedly as special assistant attorney generals. However, Attorney General Jeff Landry has never appointed these attorneys to represent the governor in connection with any criminal proceeding against applicant Mark Anthony Spell. Wow, Mark Anthony, that's funny that that's his name. I hadn't actually realized his first name was Mark. But that's just an interesting name to have because, of course, Mark Anthony is a famous figure from the Caesarian Civil War era in Rome. So it's interesting that his parents decided to go with that. But that's obviously fine. Mark Anthony Spell, including the instant writ application. It would not be proper for the Attorney General to make an appointment for special counsel, as this is not either a risk-covered case or a criminal case being prosecuted by the Attorney General. Additionally, and very deceptively, the attorneys filing the governor's motion to intervene included Jeff Landry, Attorney General, in the list of attorneys for Governor John Bel Edwards and on their signature block. Let us be clear. Jeff Landry does not represent Governor Edwards in this matter, nor does any attorney in the Louisiana Department of Justice. This filing was done without the knowledge or consent of the Attorney General or anyone with authority to give such consent. And let's go ahead and jump off for a moment so that you guys can understand exactly what's going on in case you don't, right? It seems pretty clear, but just in case it needs a little bit more explanation, right? So what we had happen here is the governor filing a motion to intervene so that he could prosecute personally Pastor Tony Spell for having the audacity to have church services open. And he falsely said that the Attorney General and numerous attorneys under the Attorney General and in the Louisiana State or Louisiana Department of Justice, right, were actually behind him and moving forward in this lawsuit with him, right, to try and give the impression that the Louisiana state government in both its executive and judicial branches were coming down on Pastor Tony Spell, when indeed this is just the egomaniacal acid trip, if you will, of one Governor John Bel Edwards. Tell me that isn't just pinnacle corruption, right? And one may ask the question, why is it that Pastor Tony Spell has elicited so much corruption from the Louisiana state government? Because let's remember, this is not the first instance of corruption against this man. We have also seen cases of illegal spying on him and his church. We have also seen people falsely trying to slander him by accusing him of assault and having charges of assault filed against him, even though there was clear video evidence that very obviously demonstrated that not only was there no assault, there was not even an attempted assault, right? Does it matter? Obviously, it doesn't seem to in a lot of people's minds. For some reason, a lot of people just want to ignore this particular case. But this man is dealing with some of the most blatant corruption I think that we've seen on a state government level in quite some time. People want to talk about Gavin Newsom, want to talk about Bill de Blasio, want to talk about, well, to be fair, Chris Cuomo literally murdered people, so I guess I won't bring that one up. But when it comes to a lot of these different people we like to talk about, are they corrupt? Sure they are, absolutely. But what's going on in Louisiana is pretty insane, in my personal opinion. Because somebody had the audacity to peaceably assemble and freely practice their religion, John Bel Edwards has decided to take it upon himself to illegally spy on people, to falsely accuse people and charge people with assault, and to also forge in a court of law under oath the names of certain attorneys, including but not limited to the Attorney General, to give the impression that the judicial branch of the state of Louisiana is coming down on this person for having the audacity to do the aforementioned crime. I hope I'm making sense to you guys. I also hope that this isn't something where I have to be my Burkean conservative self in order to understand this. In other words, I would hope that this is something that the neocon and the laissez-faire conservative and the progressive liberal and all that, I would hope this is something we could just all agree on. This is absolutely terrible corruption. Absolutely terrible corruption. And again, let's just point out something. The Louisiana state Constitution says quite plainly that an emergency order does not allow a state to forego the rights that are enshrined in the United States Bill of Rights or in the Louisiana state Constitution. That's what it says. So he has no legal precedent or authority to actually do this. On top of the fact that he's, of course, lying, forging, perjuring, in order to move forward with this authority that he doesn't actually have. It's almost like he's corrupt. But at any rate, furthermore, neither the Attorney General nor any Assistant Attorney General appointed by the Attorney General were consulted or notified by such representation in this matter. A search of Department of Justice records revealed no approval of the appointment of Jack Weiss, James Garner, Darnell Bloodworth, Joshua Force, and Christopher Cochelis as attorneys or on behalf of Governor John Bel Edwards in this matter. Of Governor John Bel Edwards in this matter. Governor's counsel are always well aware that they are not authorized to represent, that they are special assistant attorneys general to the honorable court without an appointment. Let me redo this sentence. I apologize. Governor's counsel are well aware that they are not authorized to represent that they are special assistant attorney generals to the honorable court without an appointment by the Attorney General. I don't know why it was so difficult for me to get through that sentence. Previously, counsel were instructed to correct future pleadings in a case where they were representing the governor in order to avoid confusion to this honorable court. See Exhibit A. The continued use of Special Assistant Attorney General's titles to this court, the Supreme Court of Louisiana, is misleading and misproper. Again, the continued use of the Special Assistant Attorney General's title for this court, or to this court, the Supreme Court of Louisiana, is misleading and improper, and it appears intentional. And of course, it is absolutely intentional. Unlike the governor, the Attorney General has constitutional authority to institute, prosecute, or intervene in any civil action or proceeding, which of course makes sense as to why he would want to get the Attorney General on his side in this, right? Or at least the impression that the Attorney General was on his side in this. And also, unlike the governor, the Attorney General has the constitutional authority to, upon the written request of a direct attorney, advise and assist in the prosecution of any criminal case. The governor does not. Additionally, it is the Attorney General alone who, as a matter of right, shall be heard on constitutional challenges. And he gives references here of Louisiana Constitution, Article 4, Paragraph 8, and Louisiana Code, I don't know what this Civ P actually means, but Article 1880. Moreover, this is a criminal case where the state of Louisiana is represented by the local district attorney. The use of Special Assistant Attorneys General and the name and title of the Attorney General affixed to the governor's pleadings and appearing on the signature block as an attorney in the case denotes that the Attorney General somehow authorized this filing in a criminal case. Such representation is patently false. The governor's counsel appears to blur the line of the Attorney General's role as criminal prosecutor, although not a prosecutor in this case, and the Attorney General's role as counsel for the state in civil litigation. This filing implies that the Attorney General is trying to influence or advocate for a decision in a criminal matter. It is improper, misleading, and unprofessional. And of course, I completely agree. These lawyers have made representation to this court that are clearly false and inaccurate. Jack Weiss, James Garner, Darnell Bloodworth, Joshua Force, and Christopher Cochelis do not have the authority to act on behalf of the Attorney General or the state of Louisiana in this matter, and they have never been appointed as Special Assistant Attorney Generals in this matter. Wherefore, Attorney General Jeff Landry prays that the motion to strike be granted, and for all other relief this honorable court deem appropriate. Additionally, the Attorney General prays that any cost, prays means requests in this particular case, that any costs associated with this matter and the motion to intervene be taxed against the attorneys for the governor. Respectfully submitted, Jeff Landry, Attorney General, end quote. So the Attorney General obviously not happy about this, and he's calling this corruption out, as he should be. But notice what we have going on here, friends. The state of Louisiana, at least the executive of the state of Louisiana, Governor John Bel Edwards, is lying, perjuring. What's the other word there? I've already said it in this. Forging, right? Misleading people to try and give the impression that the Attorney General is on his side, coming down on Pastor Spell, which would indeed give him legal constitutional authority if he was, right? Which he's not, but if he was, would give him legal constitutional authority to actually intervene and prosecute this case personally, right? And so he's going through a lot of corrupt circles here, jumping through a lot of corrupt hoops, so to speak, to try and make sure that he can personally prosecute this pastor for having the audacity to preach. That's actually what's going on in Louisiana. And the Attorney General's not having it. Reverend Spell said Wednesday that it all shows the degree to which the governor will go to persecute him and his family. The pastor said, quote, "Imagine this. The most powerful man in the state of Louisiana, Governor John Bel Edwards, has intervened in a criminal case against a private citizen. This is unheard of. He has shown that he has a personal vendetta against a man he cannot control. Read the story of Haman versus Mordecai, Esther chapters 6 and 7 in the Bible. It is this kind of dilemma that Governor Edwards has created for himself. In 2 Kings 7:5, when 4 lepers arose up, God went out ahead of them and rained down a spirit of insanity upon their enemies. Yesterday, it's almost as though God put the same spirit of insanity upon Governor Edwards, for only an insane man would do what he has done on January the 19th, 2022. Has done what he has done, and then period. January 19, 2022 was Governor Edwards' Waterloo, the day that God intervened in our case. This serious misconduct will garner the attention of our judicial branch and possibly be grounds for impeachment. We can hope. Maybe prison. I doubt. But certainly a loss of respect and credibility from professional people who see his personal grudge against a Pentecostal pastor, end quote. If the Supreme Court agrees that the governor or his attorney general have engaged in serious misconduct, the court has a variety. The court has a variety of tools at their disposal. However, the case is so unusual and the facts so strange that it is difficult to know what, if anything, the court may decide to do, and thus ends the article. I find this to be an incredibly troubling story. If you live in the state of Louisiana, I would just very much recommend that you get this man out of office. He is clearly corrupt. He is clearly not to be trusted. He clearly has a vendetta against liberty, against the First Amendment, against the church. Even if you're not a church-going person, even if you're not a Burkean traditionalist conservative like myself, you still should see, in my opinion, why this is problematic, why this is such an issue, right? Why this is corruption that absolutely, positively cannot be allowed to stand. Frankly, the Supreme Court has already ruled that most of these things aren't relevant anymore anyways, considering we're past that particular point in the pandemic. So that alone should let Governor Edwards know that he is to drop this particular matter, but he's not going to. He's not going to. But nonetheless, I digress on that. I want to go ahead and jump to our next article here today. So the next thing we will be talking about is Pope Francis, because of course we're always talking about some church politics here on this channel. Francis patsies Benedict. Yes, Francis has patsied Benedict. For those of you who don't know, a patsy is somebody who is involved, but is not the only person involved, and is used by the rest of the people involved to, as a scapegoat, basically, as the guy who takes the fall, right? Well, Francis has recently just turned Pope Benedict XVI, or former Pope Benedict XVI, into that person, that patsy, right? He's decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and just toss all the Catholic problems on to that guy. And how convenient is it that that guy happens to be the leader of my theological enemies? Fantastic. This originally comes from The Hill. Maureen Breslin is the writer of this article. And it's titled, Pope Promises Justice for Abuse Victims, Day After the Ratzinger Report. Pope Francis on Friday promised justice for the victims of sexual abuse by clergy members the day after a Catholic Church-sponsored investigation found that former Pope Benedict XVI failed to take action when knowing about sexual abuse while he was Archbishop of Munich, the Associated Press reports. Now, obviously, I'm not surprised by that. Like I said, one of the key elements about being a patsy is you are legitimately involved in the things you're accused of, right? So I am not here in any way, shape, or form to sing the praises of Ratzinger, otherwise known as Pope Benedict XVI, and say that he's an innocent man. He's not. Let me tell you right now. He's absolutely guilty of what he's accused of being guilty of, and it's probably a lot worse than is actually even being revealed. But what I want you guys to note is it's very interesting that as Francis is having this big problem with traditionalist Catholics, right? And he keeps, removing these traditionalist Catholics from the College of Cardinals and from certain high-ranking positions in educational institutions and certain groups and stuff like that, right? And he keeps making sure that his theological opponents of a conservative and traditionalist nature are being weakened and weakened and weakened and weakened and weakened, right? And he keeps trying to make sure that these guys can't do the different practices that actually make them considered to be a traditionalist, like, for example, keeping to the traditional Latin Mass, right? Keeps pushing this kind of thing. And Pope Benedict XVI, who's still alive, of course, he's Pope Emeritus, right? Meaning that he retired, he's still alive. He has become kind of a symbol of that traditionalist wing that feels under attack by the current Pontiff Francis. And isn't it just real, coincidental, if you will, real clever, I would say, for Francis to say, oh, that guy who's kind of the figurehead of my theological enemies, yeah, he is somebody who failed to actually cover up or failed to deal with sexual abuse. It's not me. Not me. No, I'm the guy who's going to vow justice for these sexual abuse victims, which, by the way, justice will not come. Pope Francis has been vowing justice for sexual abuse victims since February 13th of 2013. That happens to be the day he was elected Pope, by the way, if you didn't know. This is something that's been coming out of his mouth again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and we're here. And we're going to remain here until he dies. And then a new pope will come in and we'll still remain here. Only it'll be somebody else doing it this time. Maybe Francis II. Who knows, right? The point is that this is all more talk. It's all more propaganda. But this propaganda does something quite propagandistic. And that is, it makes Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, the figurehead of the traditionalist Catholic movement, look like the bad guy. He is a bad guy, but the bad guy, meaning to the exclusion of other bad guys, right? And it makes Bergoglio, otherwise known as Francis, look like the good guy, the guy who's going to rush in and save the day. The progressive guy here is the guy who's going to come in and make the Catholic Church all nice and better, right? When, of course, in reality, he's just as corrupt as the rest of them. You saw something very similar to this, in my opinion, in the Weinstein case, right? Where all of Hollywood pretended like they weren't actively involved in the same things that Weinstein was actively involved in. And then they just decided to, well, no, we'll just put all the blame on him. Only in this case, we have that added propagandistic element. Pope Francis on Friday promised justice for the victims of sexual abuse. Wait, hang on. I just read that. Francis did not specifically mention Joseph Ratzinger, the former Pope Benedict's name before he was appointed as pontiff, or the investigation's finding while giving his speech. But he did reiterate that the Catholic Church would continue to commit to justice going forward to the investigation, or in the investigation, of various abuse scandals that have plagued the Vatican and churches all over the world. Quote, the Church, with God's help, is carrying out the commitment with firm determination to do justice to the victims of abuse by its members, applying with particular attention and rigor to the canonical legislation envisaged, end quote, Francis said while giving his speech, reports the AP. I would like to know what he thinks he's actually doing. If anybody knows what the Pope has actually started doing to help with victims of sexual abuse or to weed out the systemic issues that create a breeding ground for pedophiles in the Catholic Church, I'd like to know. So far, it just seems like a bunch of rhetoric to me. But if he's actually done something, of course, I will certainly recant. Now, I'm being somewhat facetious. I kind of know he hasn't done anything, but he seems to think he has. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that he's like 83 years old now. He seems to be potentially losing his mind. I don't know. That's not nice. I shouldn't say stuff like that. But anyways, Francis said that he recently had modified the Vatican's protocol for responding to abuse situations in the hopes of making them more effective for the victims. Quote, this alone cannot be enough to stem the phenomenon, but it is a necessary step to restore justice, to repair scandal, and reform the offender, end quote, Francis added, notes the AP. Reform the offender. It is interesting that even in his lies, he does have to throw in the fact that he's also on the side of the offender. Now, let me be clear. I obviously am somebody who believes in repentance. I obviously am somebody who believes in reformation. I'm obviously somebody who believes that my God is an awesome and saving God who can save anybody, including detestable pedophiles, as terrible as those people actually are, right? That being said, the goal when you are approached with somebody who has committed this kind of crime is not reformation. It's punishment, right? It's punishment. Obviously, we hope that that person does have a little bit of, well, at least I hope that that person does have some kind of change of heart, that that person does have a genuine repentance, which for them would probably be something that would bring them almost to the point of like suicide, honestly. Like if you really came to repentance and knowledge of what you had done and turn away from there in that particular situation, right? I mean, we could only imagine the guilt one would feel, right? But that isn't the goal from a legal perspective. The goal from a legal perspective is to punish the crime Of course. Like that should be obvious, right? And from the point of a church, if it's one of your clergy members, it's absolutely to remove the clergy member, right? Defrock them, excommunicate. We're not here looking for your reformation. We're looking to punish the crime. Of course we're looking to punish the crime, right? I don't understand how that's even remotely controversial in this particular instance. Reformation is for people who take drugs, or for people who maybe you're down on their luck and joined a gang, right? This isn't something that no, we want to reform in this particular instance. No. We want it punished. This is a serious, heinous, vile crime. It needs to be punished. That should not be controversial. And again, I say that while actively seeking the repentance of these people. They say Son of Sam converted in prison. I have no reason to disbelieve it. And I'm glad for that kind of saving grace. But that doesn't mean that we need to go easy on these kinds of crimes. We know these are terrible, heinous, brutal, awful, vile, no good, disgusting, worthy of death crimes. Right? They need to be treated as such. We need to quit pretending like, we need to quit pretending like there isn't a line, basically. There is a line. A line where you have to say, look, no more. This person, lock him up, throw away the key, or spark up the electric chair. There has to be a line. Personally, I think touching children is pretty near the line. I don't know about y'all. The report on Ratzinger released Thursday by the German law firm that collected decades of church records stated that there is evidence that Ratzinger knew directly of abuse by particular priests before the scandal became public, but he did not act. German media questioned for years how much Ratzinger knew of the abuse at the time. He was a cardinal in Munich, as Peter Hullemann, a priest who was accused of abusing children in the 1970s and 80s, had been sent to jail in 1986 for abusing children, but he was still permitted to remain in the church. And that's the end of that article there. I just found this to be a very interesting propaganda piece on the part of Pope Francis. Propaganda campaign, if you will, on the part of Pope Francis. He's not actually going to do anything about sexual abuse in the church, because why would he? But what he will do is he'll make sure that you blame the traditionalist Catholics and associate the progressive Catholics with this new woke kind of thing where they're not going to be touching kids anymore, which I guess is going to be part of the progressive movement now. That's, obviously that should just be something that Catholics agree on. But, whatever, I guess. Well, let's move on to our next article, yeah? Kind of gave all the comments that I wanted to give on that. Our next article has to do with a court win for pro-lifers. Actually has a lot to do with my opening monologue here today. A court win for pro-lifers. I don't know that I would necessarily go that far, but nonetheless, we are going to talk about this. Anyways, Fox News certainly seems to think so. It says, and this is the title of this article, Supreme Court deals another setback to abortion providers in latest decision on Texas heartbeat law. Again, this is originally from Fox News, written by Sam Dorman, as well as a couple others here, it looks like, Shannon Bream and Bill Mears. The Supreme Court allowed Texas law to remain, but has not issued a final ruling on its constitutionality. So it's going to allow the Texas law to remain, but it may end up, of course, striking it down on the grounds that it's not constitutional. It's just basically it can remain in place until that moment in time. Which is why I say, I wouldn't go as far as to necessarily say this is a victory, but it could be. We'll see what happens. The Supreme Court rejected a request to remand Texas 6-week abortion law back a federal district. Excuse me. Let me reread that. The Supreme Court rejected a request to remand Texas's 6-week abortion law back a federal district court Thursday, marking another setback for advocates who have been fighting to strike down the controversial measure. Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Breyer dissented from the decision, which returns the issue to a state court for additional procedural determinations. The bill, known as a heartbeat law, has fueled the already fiery abortion debate and prompted speculation about the court's disposition towards Roe v. Wade. Last month, the court allowed Texas law to remain in place while maintaining a narrow legal path for abortion providers. Planned Parenthood CEO Alexis McGill Johnson derided Thursday's decision in a press conference release, quote, once again, the Supreme Court has betrayed the people of Texas. This is according to the CEO, Alexis McGill Johnson. Once again, the Supreme Court has betrayed the people of Texas, who have been callously stripped of their constitutional right to abortion for more than 4 months now. Again, friends, that right does not exist. There is no right to abortion in the Constitution. Find me it, quote it for me. The right to abortion shall not be infringed. I'd like to see it. Oh, you can't find that. That's because it's not there, right? It wasn't there in the original 10, and it's not there in any of the 16 or however many have been added since, right? There is no constitutionally enshrined right to abortion, period. The Supreme Court was wrong in 1973. Guess what? They're wrong quite often. They were wrong when they said it was cool to intern Japanese people, and they said, and when they said that it was cool to euthanize the mentally handicapped, and when they said that it was cool to return freed slaves to the South to be sold into slavery, or they said it was cool to, or what said that was not cool, to execute rapists and pedophiles. Yeah, the Supreme Court's wrong quite frequently, actually. You may actually know. And in this particular case, they were wrong again. There is no constitutionally enshrined right to abortion, period. It's not there. If you think it is there, I invite you to show me where you think it is there. The 14th Amendment, the one that they actually used in the 1973 ruling, that's not there. Read it frontwards, backwards, diagonally, and sideways. Not there. Quote, by enabling the state's obvious ploy to delay any resolution to this case, the court is complicit in the widespread harm to Texans who remain unable to make meaningful decisions about their own bodies. With no end in sight, people in Texas will continue to be forced to flee the state for essential health care if they can, or to carry pregnancies against their will. That is inhumane. I'm sorry, but if you are somebody who is pregnant, it's of your own free volition. 99% of the time. That's just a fact. It's just a fact. Obviously, in some cases, it's not, right? Rapes do happen. And in those particular situations, we do have a very small instances of pregnancies that do exist because of something that was not your own free volition, right? So noting that, the overwhelming majority of pregnancies were done by your own free volition. Yeah, that's kind of what happens when you have sex. Mind blown. Shocking. But sex equals babies. That's what it's for. That is its biological function. At a basal level, it is why human beings, and indeed all creatures which have sex, do indeed have sex, is to reproduce little baby us's, right? So you can't say, oh, I didn't consent to have that little baby us inside of me, when indeed you did, by virtue of the fact that you consented to have sex. You can't say, I don't consent to poop when you eat, right? You can't say, I don't consent to move forward when you take a step. You can't say, I don't consent to have liquid touching my tongue when you drink. That's not how these things work. Okay? This is the consequence of sex. You had a sexual relationship of your own free volition, and now you have to deal with these consequences. If that's inhumane, then call me Pol Pot. No, what's really inhumane is taking the life of an innocent human being simply because you feel like you don't have the financial means, or you're not going to be able to provide an emotionally stable life. Get over yourself. Get over yourself. You know what we would, if somebody shot their 5-year-old in the face and said, well, hey, I just thought I couldn't provide them with an emotionally stable life. I didn't think that I had the financial stability to take care of this child. You know what we would call that person? What I'm calling you right now? Look, there's no middle ground on this particular issue. This is one of those issues where I like to say to people, I am admittedly and proudly a radical. There is no middle ground on the abortion issue. You're either killing a person or, as Louis C.K. famously said, you're taking a crap. Meaning it's absolutely nothing. It's as good as taking a crap. This is either literally nothing at all or you're taking life. So if you're anywhere here in the middle, guess what? You've already conceded my side. You're taking life. And you know you're taking life. You know you're taking life. Humans, by definition, are persons. And the fetus is, by definition, alive. 2 + 2 = 4. It is a human life. And it hasn't committed a crime, by the way. So that makes it an innocent human life. And you're killing it. It's that simple. It is literally that simple. Any attempt to overcomplicate this issue any more than that is frankly stupid. It is a stupid person trying to justify an evil and disgusting act. Or let me rephrase that. It is a person operating stupidly, because I don't believe pro-choicers are stupid. It is a person operating stupidly in order to justify an evil and vile act. There is no justification to take innocent human life, period. None. And if I'm going to sit here and say that I don't agree with soldiers in Iraq bombing brown kids, and if I'm going to sit here and say that I don't agree with the George Floyds and Kelly Thomases of the world at the hands of police, and if I'm going to sit here and say that I don't agree with the internment of Japanese people in 1940s and the virtual concentration camps the Native Americans have been forced on in the form of reservations and all these other kinds of things, then you're damn sure that I'm going to be saying the exact same thing when an innocent human life in the womb is taken, because you feel like that violates your freedom. In other words, it violates your freedom for you not to do that, right? But at any rate, where was I here? Planned Parenthood will continue to fight for our patients, and for all people in Texas who deserve the dignity of being able to murder their own children. Of being able to control their own lives and futures. Absolutely detestable. Detestable. There is no functional difference from a person who would put a Jew in a concentration camp, or between a person who would put a Jew in a concentration camp and a person who would murder a baby in the womb. No difference. You are equal in your moral detestability as far as what you're supporting there. The decision comes just after the 49th annual March for Life on Friday, which includes a march ending at the Supreme Court. The event, which started with the Roe v. Wade decision, could see the end of the landmark ruling this summer, maybe. In an interview with Fox News, March for Life President Janine Mancini said that even if Roe is overturned, the movement's work isn't done, which of course is true. Vast majority of states will continue to have some kind of a legal right to abortion because it's on their own personal law books, right? Or at least it will be on their own personal law books once this is overturned. So, like, for example, California is not going to have illegal abortion just because Roe v. Wade is overturned, right? That's definitely not how that's going to work. Overturning Roe would return the issue to states, potentially allowing Texas even more leeway in restricting abortions. And I'll let you know, for what I personally want for the state that I'm in, Idaho, right? I would like to see the practice criminalized. I'm very forward about this. I'm an abolitionist in this regard. I think that it is just, to me, it's as obvious that abortion should be legally punished as it is that pedophilia should be legally punished. If I'm being honest, I find something to be problematic with people, to be morally lacking in people when they don't actually agree with me on that particular issue. There's very few issues where somebody disagrees and I say, that's because of moral deficiency in their character. In this particular case, I very freely say, yes, it is because of moral deficiency in your character. It should be obvious to you that abortion providers, quote unquote, should be put in prison. And indeed, that the mothers who get abortions should also be put in prison. That should be obvious to you. If I brought a child to my local doctor and he decided to beat him over the head with a 2x4 until he died, we would both go to prison. Because duh, right? But for some reason, if I send my wife to do it and make sure that the baby's in the womb, neither one of them are going to prison. I don't know. Doesn't make any sense to me. Seems to me like it should be just as obvious that those two people need to go to prison, that those two people need to have the book thrown at them, as it is that the people who commit rapes against women, commit rapes against children, who traffic human beings, who rob banks, etc., should be just as obvious that these people need to go to prison as those people need to go to prison. And I'm not shy about that. I don't see any reason why I should be shy about that. This is literally what we're talking about here. This is the gravity of the situation we're talking about here. We're not talking about the legalization of weed, right? Or whether or not we should have CRT in our schools. No, we're talking about people actually dying. Persons dying. Lives snuffed out, never to return. That's what we're talking about. In the millions. Yes, I think people should be legally punished for that. Absolutely. And I think that you should push that date back as far as conception. And any abortion at any point in time after conception should be legally punished, obviously barring things like a miscarriage and stuff like that, or a threat to the mother's life, because there's just nothing that you can do about those situations. Nor is there anything you should want to do about those situations, because clearly the mother is not a murderer in that situation, right? But I'm not shy about this. That's how I feel. I'm tired of the pussyfoot conservatism in regards to the pro-life issue. If you're not on board with the abolitionist side in regards to this issue, you're not playing for the team. You're playing for the other team, right? You think you're playing for my team. You think you're playing for the pro-life team, but you're not really. You're batting for that team. You're just using our bat to bat for that team for some reason. I don't know why, but regardless. Last month's ruling did not provide a final word on the constitutionality of Texas law. Justices Amy Coney Barrett, Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh backed Justice Neil Gorsuch's opinion in full. The court allowed the Texas law to remain in effect while it heard a challenge about whether parties may bring suit against it before the state has actually taken enforcement actions consistent with the law. All right, so that's the end of that article there. I'm sure that's one where I likely lost some people, because I know that my abortion opinions are relatively controversial, and not everybody who watches this is quite as Burkean and paleocon as I am. So for those of you who don't really appreciate my views on that but still decide to stick around, I do appreciate you, just so you know. But nonetheless, that is the way I feel. All right. So, last thing we have to talk about today is more about the Supreme Court. We're going to talk a little bit about SCOTUS's Oklahoma Native American land issue. A very interesting issue that I have only recently actually discovered exists, so I won't be able to give too much serious commentary on it, but it is something that I thought was important, so I did want to go ahead and talk about it with you guys today. Supreme Court to revisit part of Native American land decision in Oklahoma. This is originally from The Hill. The writer of this article is originally Carolyn Vecchio. And let's go ahead and jump right into this before we hop off. Excuse me. The Supreme Court said on Friday that it would revisit part of a decision it made in 2020 on a case which focused on Oklahoma's ability to prosecute on Native American land. The original decision, McGirt versus Oklahoma, sided with tribal leaders finding that a large part of land in the eastern part of the state qualified as an Indian reservation, according to the Washington Post. In the 5-4 decision, Justice Neil Gorsuch sided with the more liberal justices for the majority, and that's actually something that I would agree probably more with the liberal side on than the conservative side. I don't like the ideas of tribal sovereignty, if I'm being honest, but not because I disagree with the principle. More because I think, due to the nature of how we've set up tribal sovereignty in this country, I think it effectively keeps the Native American population down, while kind of pretending to empower them and give them rights to their own land and stuff of that nature. A perfect example of what I mean by this is how Native American women are frequently going missing, and there's not even a list of them anywhere. Like, there's not a list of Native American women in the FBI that have been gone missing. You have all the other different races, right? Hey, you have all the other different statistics on these different races, right? But when it comes to natives, well, that's supposed to be something that's done by the tribal legal authorities, and so the federal government and local state governments and stuff like that can't get involved, and the tribal authorities don't have the money. And so these girls just end up going missing, and nobody even has a repository that actually lists their names when they're going missing, right? It's an absolute travesty. And so because of that, I've never been a huge fan of tribal sovereignty, and other things like that. Although I do agree with the principle behind tribal sovereignty, which is, of course, the idea that these individual tribes are individual nations, and they should have a right to operate independently with self-determination, right? They should be able to rule themselves, in other words. I personally kind of wish to see something like a Native American Zionism. I think would be a good solution to this problem. The great thing about being Irish or Italian or Jewish or etc. Is there's an Ireland or an Italy or an Israel to go back to, right? In other words, you have the right to self-determination and self-rule. You can go live elsewhere also, right? There's plenty of Irish people in the United States, plenty of Jewish people in the United States, plenty of Italian people in the United States. Sometimes they stay here for multiple generations and become part of the American ethnos in a more ethnic way, if that could even really be said to exist, because we're such a ginormous melting pot here, right? But nonetheless, but if for some awful reason, God forbid, of course, but if for some awful reason America had somebody in power who was like, you know what, I don't like Irish folk, there's an Ireland to go back to. The Irish people, the Irish culture, the Irish way of life will be preserved, because in the end, you can always go back to Ireland, right? That's kind of a big deal, in my opinion. That's a safety blanket that I believe every ethnos should have. And the Native Americans currently do not have that safety blanket. If some vile racist gets control of this country, or almost even worse because it's not as obvious, if some people who want to just keep them down in a very insidious way get in office, which in that case tends to be the case, right? There is nothing that they can do to go back to, right? There's no home to run back to. There's no, defender of their way of life, of their culture, of their various languages, of their ethnic background and their ancestry, right? It doesn't exist. And I think, personally, the only real way that you could solve that problem is to have a Native American state. State in the national sense, like a country that is not part of the United States. Obviously, it would be made up of some of the land in the United States. But that is not actually part of the United States. This is also a position where I'm somewhat of a radical. I think that my personal suggestion would be Alaska, only because it is very sparsely populated and has tons of natural resources. So it would be setting them up for success. But I think that is the only way, really, that you're going to solve the problems that are created by things like tribal sovereignty. It's the only way that we had solution in regards to the Jewish people, right? And again, it's not like, because a lot of people wonder, like, well, are you saying that they should be forced out? Well, no, absolutely not, right? There's still plenty of Jewish people here. I'm a Jewish people here. Hello. I don't live in Israel, right? My family has never lived in Israel, at least not for, not for a couple thousand years, right? But nonetheless, God forbid something terrible were to happen, there's an Israel to run to, right? And I just believe that no ethnos is truly free without that self-determination, without that nation where they can run to, where they can say, this is a place for me and my people and my family and my ancestry and my descendants to preserve my culture, my way of life, right? I just don't think you can truly call yourself free as a people. Maybe free as individuals, but there are different kinds of freedoms, and free as a people is an important kind of freedom that I think we neglect in our hyper-individualistic society that is modern-day America. The ethnos needs to be free as an ethnos, right? And I think the only way you're going to actually accomplish something like that, frankly, is by establishing some kind of a Native American state. Now, how does that relate to what we're talking about here? Well, this is one of those issues, I think, that is created by problems like that are created in tribal sovereignty, right? So for background, what's going on in this case is that there was a man who was committing a crime against a non-native man who was committing a crime against a half-native child, his own, right, off of a native reservation, or excuse me, on the native reservation. And the question is, can the federal government prosecute that child abuser, or the Oklahoma state government in this case, actually? Can they prosecute that child abuser? Because he's not a native, right? He's a citizen of the United States of America, but he's committing his crimes against one who is a citizen of a tribal reservation and on that reservation's property. You see what I mean? It's a super dicey kind of a situation. And in my personal opinion, it's a situation that is caused by the super ambiguous kind of legal dynamic that we have going on in the form of tribal sovereignty. Let me know what you guys think about this. I know this is one of the more controversial opinions that I have, but it's an opinion that I actually believe quite strongly. You've heard me say it before. I am a nationalist. My nationalism is somewhat different than others' nationalism in that I believe in nationalism for all ethnos. But I am a nationalist. I absolutely believe that the individual freedom obviously needs to be respected. But there is a freedom of the nation to operate as the nation that also needs to be respected. And in the case of nations such as the Native Americans who do not have a country, there is no institution that is the nation to respect. And it's an unfortunate fact of human nature. The justices will revisit a more narrow part of their decision about whether non-Native Americans who commit crimes against the Native community in areas of Oklahoma that are considered Native American land can be prosecuted by the state, the Associated Press reported, which is what I was just telling you about. The AP noted that since Native American recognized land was expanded during the 2020 case to include most of Tulsa, it meant that criminal prosecutions against Native Americans in those areas also could not be conducted by the state. You see the issue here, right? Tulsa's a big city. And now there's a bunch of people, non-natives, citizens of the state of Oklahoma, who now live on Native American land in Tulsa, committing crimes that the local Indian reservation is going to have to deal with because as it stands right now, the state of Oklahoma can't. And the solution to that is to remove the Native Americans right over to that land? You see what I mean? Like, there's no solution here that really works. And in my opinion, that's because the whole system is messed up. The whole thing's screwed up. It doesn't work, right? Native Americans in the United States should be treated like anybody else. And if they want to have a nation, which I think they should, then we should carve out an area of the country, frankly, for them to have a nation. Again, I suggest Alaska. I think Alaska would work very well. They wouldn't be landlocked. They'd have tons of natural resources. The population exchange would be fairly easy. It's very sparsely populated, which is sort of part of that point number 3, right? It's untainted, meaning there's not like a whole bunch of cities, right? All the nature's still there. You can do whatever you want with this land. I don't know. I don't know. Again, I'm very interested to know what you guys actually think about this, because I don't know if I've ever talked about this particular belief of mine publicly. But I don't see a good solution to these tribal sovereignty issues, and there's hundreds of them. And they do nothing but make Native Americans' lives miserable. For example, this child who's being abused. For example, those women who are now missing. For example, a Native American boy who is murdered by some other Native American boys because he doesn't wear the right colors. Because there's gang violence in every culture. But the difference there is the gang violence in that culture you can't do anything about because it's not the United States. Sort of, technically, in a way. It's weird. It's weird, right? And it's like, you don't want to violate treaty with these people. That is immoral, right? You don't want to take land from them. That's immoral. You don't want to violate their sovereignty over their traditional homelands. That would be immoral. But do you want to continue to allow spousal abuse and child abuse and drug abuse and gang violence and all this other kind of stuff? And again, I don't think there's a solution to this problem in our current way of doing things. I just don't see it. Similar to the idea that I'm putting forward, Canada recently gave the Inuit peoples, with the people we would colloquially refer to as Eskimo, a form of autonomy over the Nunavut region, which formerly had some other name I don't even remember. It's been Nunavut for my entire life. So it's not like what I'm proposing here is that radical. Nunavut isn't a country. But it's not like what I'm proposing here is like completely, out of the realm of possibility. It's something I think we should consider. The AP noted that since Native American... hang on, sorry. The state had urged the Supreme Court to have the 2020 McGritt versus Oklahoma decision overturned, but that request was denied by the justices, the Post noted. And again, I don't really know how you could overturn it without really committing some kind of a immorality against the native population and against their sovereignty, right? You're really stuck between two bad decisions in this situation. So I can't say I disagree with them not wanting to hear it. I probably would have made the same ruling, like I said, that Gorsuch and the liberal justices did if I were a judge, which of course I'm not. I'm just some dude talking about stuff on his computer, right? At any rate, instead, part of that decision issued 1 year ago will be revisited by the High Court in April. Oklahoma officials, including Governor Kevin Stitt, a Republican, applauded the Supreme Court's decision on Friday. Quote, "The fallout of the McGritt decision has been destructive. Criminals have used this decision to commit crimes without punishment. Victims of crimes, especially native victims, because again, who's the population on these reservations? It's the natives, right? And who's the people we can't prosecute? The people victimizing the natives, right? So it's, again, I just don't think that there's any good solutions. I really don't. Other than what I have already proposed, which maybe isn't even a good solution. It's just the best, in my opinion. Especially native victims have suffered by being forced to relive their worst nightmares in a second trial or having justice elude them completely, end quote, Stitt said in a statement. The Republican governor said the 2020 decision has hamstrung law enforcement in half of the state. Quote, "Now that Governor Stitt's fight against tribal sovereignty has once again come up short, we hope he will consider joining tribes rather than undermining our efforts so that we can focus on what is best for our tribal nations and all Oklahomans," end quote. Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. said, according to the Post. And you can see both sides, right? You really can. You really can. Governor Stitt is correct. And there are numerous Native American activists who will tell you this. Russell Means would famously tell you this, right? The tribal sovereignty thing doesn't work. And yet, Principal Chief Hoskin is also correct. It's their land. And he is seemingly trying to undermine their rights to their land. So how do you solve this? Well, again, I don't think you do. I don't think you do. I think it just continues on ad infinitum until eventually, it collapses, right? But I think there is a possible solution, and that is a true Native American sovereignty. Maybe Oklahoma. Maybe Oklahoma could be. Now, my problem with Oklahoma is the same problem that I would have with the Republic of Lakota, which is namely that it's landlocked. Oklahoma also has the added problem of having quite a pretty large population, really. Quite a pretty large. That doesn't really make any sense. But you guys know what I mean. But regardless, I think that this would be a good idea. I think it's an idea that we need to start considering. The idea of Native American self-determination. I mean, look, Israel has managed to shake up the entire planet over a strip of land the size of New Jersey. I think we have at least one strip of land the size of New Jersey hanging around, right? And by the way, since we're on this particular topic, this isn't the only pretty controversial opinion in regards to this kind of stuff that I happen to believe. I am a firm believer that Hawaii should be given back to the Hawaiian people. I'm also a firm believer that Puerto Rico should either become an independent nation or become the 51st state. There's no reason for it to just be hanging out in the abyss as a territory. But those are all topics for another episode. So that's everything that we got here today, friends. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you did, please remember to like and share this video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. We try to go live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I try to be a unique voice here in that I am not only a religious conservative like many others, not only a paleo conservative like many others, but I am also a Burkean conservative and a nationalist, unlike many others. And so I hope to provide you guys with some kind of interesting content here that is a little bit different. If you find it important or interesting or whatever you find it to be, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing if you have not done so. Again, hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. If you feel that this is worth it, you can also contribute to helping me turn this into a career by either a monthly subscription to the Patreon or a one-time donation to the PayPal account. And I'll go ahead and share links to both of those in the live chat for you guys. Description will be updated to include the different articles which we had today. And also, this will be airing on Rumble. So those of you guys who wanted to catch this actually on Rumble, or wanted to share it on Rumble or anything like that, you certainly can do that as well. By the way, in regards to the giving thing, I just want to remind you guys, please do make sure that anytime you are giving, you give with trepidation. I only want your money if I deserve your money. Of course, I want to make this a career, right? But I only want to make this a career if I have earned the right to make this a career. We have plenty of people giving their stupid opinions on politics. We have plenty of people giving their stupid opinions on current events. We have plenty of people giving their stupid opinions on everything else under the sun. We don't need more people giving stupid opinions. We need more people giving opinions that will help us reform a high society, a high culture, if indeed that is the Lord's will. And if that's something that you think is provided by this channel, please do consider giving. But if it's not, then please don't. And with that, friends, I want to go ahead and say thank you very much for watching. This has been TheCynicogue, TheCynicogue News, where we want to remind you guys to think like a Neanderthal, little tagline we have there. And I want to remind you guys, my fellow watchdogs, to be weary of your answer to this question. And that is, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise